Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. We have some people trickling in, but we wanted to get started on time. Was everyone able to pick up a packet at the front? Okay, if not, feel free, right over here on this chair. May be helpful during the presentation. Okay, this is our second event of our Heart and Mind Parenting series. And if you missed our first one, it can be found online still. We may circulate that again. But plan to have them kind of all housed, similar to the Constitution lecture series. We want to extend a welcome to all of you in person, members of our community, our AHS parents, and those of you online that are watching this evening as well. Welcome to... We have Mr. Chase Hale, our principal of the American Fork campus here. And we also have Mr. Blaine Hunsaker, who's our assistant principal over middle school and the fine arts at our American Fork campus. So welcome to them. And also a special thank you to Jay Clark and his team, who is facilitating all of our streaming this evening and our audiovisual needs. So thank y'all up there. Okay, we are going to have an opening prayer offered by an AHS parent and former trustee, Katie Homestead. And then Mr. Blaine Hunsaker will introduce our guest. We'll go from there.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we're very grateful for this opportunity to come together and to learn together, and we pray that Dr. Scoresby will be able to share those things that he has and has prepared. We pray for the streaming to work tonight and for those guests that are trying to view from their locations. We are thankful for American Heritage, grateful for those that have come before us and created a space and place for our children to be where the Spirit can reside and they can learn alongside the Holy Ghost. And we are so grateful to have a Savior and for the gospel of Jesus Christ on the earth today. We say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
It's an honor for me to be able to introduce Dr. Scoresby to you. Dr. Scoresby received his PhD in counseling and psychology from the University of Minnesota. He is also an organizational consultant and he is an organizational consultant and to businesses, where he provides management and leadership and development, focusing on innovation and high-performance team development. His work has been associated with improving performance both in education and in business. He has more than 35 years of experience in family counseling, education, professional speaking, training, facilitating, and organizational consulting. He has received and trained the executive leaders and managers of several businesses and has written books on personal leadership, team leadership, and executive leadership. Dr. Scoresby has also authored training programs for managers and designed to improve creativity and problem solving, developing accountability, organizing high-performance work environments. And on a personal note, Dr. Scoresby was my professor years ago, and he even says he remembers me. Now, maybe that's a good thing or a bad thing, because his class sizes were about the size of this North Auditorium filled, right? So I don't know how he could remember me, but he says he does. And I just want him to know that he has been a great influence in my life. And I have one book that I kept for all my college years in a very special place because I refer to it often. And it's the blue book. I wish I would have brought it tonight, but it's well worn on the side, right? Because it talked about all the good things that I learned in his class with child development. So, Dr. Scoresby, welcome to American Heritage School, and let's give him a big, warm round of applause.
I remember you because you were the smart one. All university professors remember the smart students. As I was listening to that, I thought, I wonder why she sent over that bio. And because I don't do that anymore, but I am still very interested in families and children, and have been most of my professional life. But I want to talk about that just briefly to let you know that it isn't just with children. How are the two of you?
Hi.
You two should be here.
You're right, we should.
Is that a compliment?
Well, they know I love them, so I can get away with that. So I forgot to bring, I saved it all week. The Deseret News had a headline that stuck out to me, and it said, the therapist shortage in Utah. Now think about that with me just for a minute. What does that mean? Does that mean that all of the therapists got up and moved to Nevada? Or does it mean that something else is happening to our families and our children, and people are now hunting for ways to help them care with their kids? And then you start asking the question, well, what is it? You know, what is taking place? What is causing some of the situations in our families? Well, sometimes it's us as parents. We sometimes cause stuff that happen in our children's lives, if there is one cause. But actually, it's a combination of things. Now, in my academic program at the University of Minnesota, we study a lot of abnormal behavior. In fact, there's a huge, thick book on all the different kinds of abnormal behavior you're supposed to be able to know. You're supposed to be able to talk with somebody in just a few minutes, say, you are a paranoid schizophrenic and you have these features, and we can put it on your insurance form and they will pay for so long. We have to be able to do that. And so I was in one of those classes, and I began to feel a little mentally ill myself, because when I'd read the different types of mental illness, I could read myself in some parts of them, like, well, I do that sometimes. And then I do that sometimes, and I began to kind of feel like, well, maybe I'm, And so I thought, I'm going to go to the library and see if I can find any literature on what it means to be a healthy person. And the literature is not as large as the problem-oriented literature, but it's substantial still. And so at BYU, when I was in the department and taught about children, I was invited one year to develop a graduate course on what they called emotional development. Now, think about this for just a minute. In the textbooks in child development, and I spent a lot of years at BYU. For years, they never had anything with emotional development or moral development, which was really interesting. They didn't even have it in any textbooks that were sold nationally. So BYU was adjusted for that, and I had an opportunity to build a class for moral development and for one having to do with emotional development. And nobody else wanted it. It was a low status thing. But I went to work, and I got into the middle of it, and I was in the middle of this treasure trove of ideas about how you help human beings become really successful from inside families. And so I started to read. One of the first books I wrote was Rearing Moral Children in an Immoral Society. And then I got into the emotional part of life. And so I became well acquainted with that, and so now I'm having my clinical practice over the years, and I'm starting to see these kids come into this practice their parents are bringing, and sometimes it's the kids' experience with public schools, or any school, perhaps except for this one. And schools have an interesting problem. They define failure as quickly as they do success. And so a lot of the kids I started seeing would come in and sit down, and they'd look dumb and talk like they were, until I got to the point where this one boy, I said, "You look like you feel pretty dumb." And he said, "I am." And I said, "Is this a temporary condition or permanent, do you think?" And he laughed a little bit and he said, "I don't know." So I told him, I have given many intelligence tests. What if I gave you an intelligence test and you turned out to be really, really bright? What will that mean to you? And he said, "I don't think it'll happen." So I did. And I'm acquainted with the tests. Psychologists are acquainted with tests. We test like crazy and write reports the same, because we're the ones often, along with psychiatrists, that send people to mental hospitals and define problems for courts. So I presented the results of the test to him, and I said, "I think you're in real trouble." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, your parents apparently think that you're not doing so great, and you think you're not doing so great, but this test says you're actually performing way below what your talents are. So we have a problem to solve. Do you want to actually learn how to do that, or do you want to just continue to meander around?" And he said, "No, I'd like to do that." And then with just a little bit of help and some cues and all sorts of stuff, it's amazing what happens when children begin to see and understand that they are very different than what their performance is actually being. Now here's what's happening to some of us. The parents of 21st century children have not caught on as a group yet that the 21st century requires something different from parents than the 20th century did. We just bring some traditional stuff and we think that's good enough to run our family, and for a lot of families it's not. In addition to that, the amount of time that parents are outside the home working has increased in the last 20 years significantly, so the parents are farther from their children. One of my graduate students finished his work at BYU and went to the University of Tennessee, and while he was there he applied for and received a huge NIH grant. And he was studying adolescent children over a 3-year period in 4 sites, one in Utah, one in the East, one in England, 5 sites, one in India, in Bombay, India. One day he called me and he said, "I've just come home from Bombay." He said, "I interviewed all the kids." He had to go fly there and interview them over this several times a year. And he said, "I finished interviewing, it was in my hotel room." And he said, someone knocked, I went to the door, and there were about 10 kids. And they walked into the door, and I said, "Well, this is fun. What do you want to talk about?" He said, "Here is their question. Why don't they spend time with us?" And I said, "Who do you think the word "they" refers to?" And they said, "Well, they're talking about us as parents. They're talking about other adults." And I thought about that, and I thought, that's so interesting. Because even in families where the parents spend a great deal of time, the children still feel very lonely. Now think about that with me for just a minute. And then let's suppose that you have stuff. You may have seen a copy of the handout that we did for cities. And I made this presentation for 8 cities in Utah County over the year before COVID. And and the mayor said to me that in the pandemic, the calls to the city police for family violence increased about 70 to 80% in each city. We're bringing everybody. Now think about that for a minute. What was going on then? Well, the parents were invited to help the kids do their schoolwork at home, right? And that's always a little challenging, isn't it? Okay, and then they were all together. Everybody was in there, and my wife and I quarantined ourselves from everybody, and I tried to quarantine myself from her, and she did for me, and we haven't succeeded at that. And we've gone through this whole thing, and it's like all those different types of things. And then there's one other thing. When you talk with kids who are having real trouble, there's a few that don't know what right is. But most of the ones who make bad decisions know what right is. So our problem is not transmitting to our children what the concepts of right are. The problem is actually getting them or helping them behave with what they know to be right. And then there's this astonishing thing where you think some kids are just doing great and they're going along. And then one or more of them will do something that's so astonishing, so destructive or hurtful or something terrible, and it just is jaw-dropping. And you think, where did that come from? Why that? And so on. So this presentation tonight is designed to answer this question. What are the things? And I found out that most parents could not answer that. Would you happen to have an idea about what are the 10 or 12 best things parents could do to promote emotional resilience in their children so they are confident and they face life with grit and toughness and they can honor their moral code and they can stay with it? You have any ideas so far? What would you say? Listen to them. We got one idea. Thank you for that. Maybe not rescue them. Okay. Very good. Spend time with them. We have 3 good ideas.
Help them to understand what's going on with them emotionally, like addressing their emotions.
Okay, about emotions. So bright. Yeah. Yes, sir. Learn from failure. All really good ideas. And what if the children who are in real trouble are in families that do almost all of those things? Then what would you do? Now that's what's happening. And then I have one more thing to say before starting the slide presentation. It blows my mind that nationally we're having this contest between schools and parents. And the reason it is that every single school system, and I'm fairly well acquainted with the research about the role of parents with the schools. Here's Harvard's educational research, that in every age and every stage, the level of parental involvement with schools is related to achievement and to social success. So you'd want more parental involvement if it's constructive and not less, wouldn't you? You'd want the parents to be involved and set up an approach to get them involved and help them do things at home that help with school. So one of the things that is happening, what I think this school does, it probably provides a set of connecting points for people to get together in regard to their children. But that doesn't happen often in a lot of other places. In our churches, by the way, where it could or should, and especially in our schools. For years, I operated a foundation which received money for doing things for schools, and we sent programs and went and trained teachers in many places around the country. And what was going on then is that they could not get the parents to get involved with their kids. And the parents didn't want to be sometimes, and so gradually over time, the school officials just decided, well, we'll do it then. And we saw. Do you want to know one of the places that we went to? My wife can remember our trip to Virginia. We took the teachers in an entire school district and said, here's what you could do to improve these kinds of things in the lives of your kids. And it was very interesting to watch. Out of all those experiences came this presentation. It's about emotional self-reliance. And so we need to talk a little bit about what that is. So if you said, well, we want that in our children. Now, while you're doing that, take a look at these and see how much attention you're paying as parents to any of these. They start, persist, and finish work. They succeed with people. They demonstrate self-control. They have many friends. They're quite happy. They have a map of successful life. They have more positive than negative feelings. They find a lot of satisfaction. They have social confidence. They can meet people typically and are confident. It doesn't mean some of them are not shy, because they are, but they learn to be confident, and they understand forgiveness, adaptabilities, and boy, can they achieve. And they have empathy. That's what the research says about emotionally resilient kids. Do you want any of those type of kids? Okay, so here it is. Emotional self-reliance is an ongoing interaction between what's happening inside of ourselves and the environmental press that we're feeling from the outside, and the relative power we feel and believe comes from events and people and situations. We feel more powerful from within than we believe that the environment is controls in our lives. So who controls children's academic behavior? The teachers or the kids? The teachers do. They set the due dates, isn't that right? And they give the grades, all right? And then there are other places in children's lives where there are a lot of external influences, like the family, which exerts the certain kind of influence, or any other organization. And gradually what happens is the children begin to feel less powerful within themselves than they believe the environment external to them has. So if you heard them say, well, all of my friends are doing this, they're announcing that their friends are more influential to them than they are. So how many of your children on their own make their beds virtually every morning? Would you raise your hands if your children do? Three. How many of your children require that you wake them up in order to get them up? Let me ask the question a different way. How many of that? Now, the children, are inviting us then to exert influence over the control of their lives, right? Okay, and so if we want to be competent parents, and so we're going to get them up and keep them going, and so on. And you said helicopter parents. Some of the parents don't even need to be helicopter. They're just constructive, effective people. And they understand what to do, and so they say, well, we're going to have breakfast at this time. And this doesn't mean we should say to our children, you should control your life, but we should teach them how. And I want you to know that inviting kids who don't have control of their lives to make their bed every morning is what I've learned to do in my counseling practice. And they'll say, why do that? And I'll say, well, it isn't really a big deal. It'll take you less than 30 seconds. But if you make it before you leave your room, who's in charge of your life? They are, at least for a few minutes, until somebody starts calling them to do this and so on. So if you think of this definition, it's an ongoing interaction between the relative inner power we feel and the power we believe comes from events, people, and situations external to ourselves. Now, the reason why emotions are involved in this whole deal is because they're so important to us, but we often do not know how to deal with them very well. In fact, emotions are often problematic for people. We have emotions sometimes when we don't want them. We'd like to just shut them down. And then we don't have emotions other times when we do want them. And so a lot of people have confusing ideas about what emotions are. Some people, when they want to love somebody, can't quite make them love this person. And sometimes when people are angry, they wish they didn't. Or sometimes people will cry and we have all these emotions. So what % of you think that emotions are problematic? for you. They create some difficulty for you. Would you raise your hands? You have a few. You have some difficulty with it. All right. So let's take a minute and then say, all right, here's what they do. Emotions give us focus, they motivate, and they provide meaning. Now, I know that you, forgive me because I'm going to give you a pop quiz from time to time. So what are the three things that emotions do for us? Motivate and provide meaning. Thank you. Now, some emotions, it turns out, are inherited. Did you know that? They are inherited. So joy is, they can find it in children's brains, anger, anticipation, surprise, disgust, and anxiety. And children have that at birth. They can find it in the brain. Anxiety, for example, is an inherited emotion. And everybody has their own. It's a defensive emotion. Disgust is the response of children who eat something, and don't like it. That's disgust. And surprise and anticipation, looking forward. One of the coolest studies in all time is this study. 5-month-old children are sitting and they're propped up and they're watching a car go down a track. And they learn to do that, and then they put these little cars on the end and put a board up so they couldn't see anything in between, and they wanted to see how soon children began to anticipate by turning their heads and watching the cars out on the other end. Now, a lot of research in children produce serendipitous results, and this is one of the best ones ever. So they're watching, and children 5 months can anticipate. It's inherited. Then the researchers put 2 cars on the end, and children exactly doubled their watching time for those 2 cars. Then they put 3 cars, and they tripled the watching times, which means that at 5 months of age, children can sum. So what they're discovering is that they come with many more abilities than we give them credit for. They have over 100 reflexes at the time they're born. And they have all sorts of other genetic things that are going on, and emotions is one of those. Now, what isn't known by a lot of people is that emotions are organized into pairs. Now, you might not think, well, who cares about that? Well, I'll tell you. Suppose you're 19 or 20 and you're dating some boy and you like him and everything's fine, but you're not really sure, and one night he says, Madeline, I love you. And she might say, I love you too. And then in the morning she wakes up and thinks, he slurps when he eats. And he slurs his words when he... What's she feeling in the morning after the love business? What's the opposite of love? Fear. So quite often, fear is on the other, love is on the far side of fear. So what's the opposite of joy? And sadness, and fear and anger, anticipation and surprise, disgust and trust, and love and anxiety are all paired up in the human brain. Did you know that? So they are going to occur together. Do you understand that? And so the next time you help your children be really happy and everything's successful, you're also teaching them to appreciate what? What? Okay. And then if you say, okay, what about fear and anger? Are they linked together? Yes. So quite often when your children are angry and you get mad at them, your children are just simply afraid. And they need to be calmed down instead of gotten angry at and told to sit down and be quiet. Isn't that interesting? Well, it might not be to you, but it is to me, and I hope I get to interest you more as we go along. Okay, ready? Here are 3 things that you should take away from this next slide. There are 3 parts. There are several parts to emotions, but here are the 3. There is an emotional state, and that's the body's temperature and movement, the emotional experience, which is how we describe our emotions, and then we have emotional displays, which is how we express them to other people. So, cultural displays for emotions? Yes. You've been in any other language culture and you know that if you learn the language, you must also learn some of the emotional displays for those emotions. Isn't that true? Okay. And so then we do that, and families differ and races differ in terms of how they display emotions. There's a lot of research about racism, for example, that simply suggests that what it is wariness because we cannot read the emotional displays of people who are different than us. And so we become a little anxious when we're around them, and we don't understand the meaning of their words or how they operate. And then the emotional experience is how we describe about our feelings and talk about them, understand what they're like. And you might be thinking, well, who cares about that? Well, let me tell you why. In order for you to understand another person, you will do so to essentially the extent you can comprehend your own emotions. Because when you're looking at somebody and trying to figure out what they're feeling, who do you scan first, them or you? You. Okay, and then we have gender differences in all this. See, we have men who deal differently with emotions and individuals, and then the body's physical response. Okay, now have you got these down? What are the three parts? What are the three parts of them? Emotional. Okay, and emotional, speak louder. Experience, which is, I am so happy to hear you answer that. What did I just announce? That's right, that's emotional experience. My heart was just beating loudly when you started to respond. That's my emotional state. Okay, and then it's so great that you spoke. I just gave you my emotional display. Now, you probably are aware that you're teaching your children these three things all of the time, whether you want to or not. Right? Okay, and they're going to follow your examples, and they're going to do things you teach them. But see, think about that with me just for a minute. If that's true, what do emotions become? What do emotions become? Oh, thank you. Good question. Emotional display is the outward stuff like, I'll give you an example. With the Mexican people, the comfortable talking distance is about 12 inches. See, they'll move right in and say, nice to talk to you. What's the comfortable talking distance for North Americans? Well said. It's actually 24 inches. So if you saw an American, North American talking to a Hispanic person, the Hispanic person is moving and the North American is backing away, and they'll go across the hall just like that. And then a lot of Hispanic people talk about how open and expressive they are, about embraces and so on. So in answer to your question, one is the outward display of emotions that's on your face and how you show emotions, and the other one is what you describe or feel inside. So now you can answer this question. When newborns arrive into the world, they can imitate the human face by 3 days. What is on the human face? Well, she says smile. She's right. Okay, but it's more than a smile. What's on the human face? Emotions. What are they looking for? See, they're going to watch. You're going to watch your face. And they'll respond to voice tones. See, and in a little way, they're a little teeny bit like puppies. You are the best puppy ever, and I just love you to bits. And they would cry because they're paying attention to the voice tone. See? And gradually, as children mature and so on, they get a whole lot better at, all right, Now, let me tell you, what do emotions become? They become our personality qualities. I don't know if that impresses you or not, but if you're thinking, really? Emotions become our personality characteristics and qualities. So here it is. If I felt afraid in 10 situations, and I felt afraid in this one, and in this one, and this one, and this one, and this one, do you think I would start developing a personality that had a lot of fear in it? Could I learn to avoid people? If you talk to school administrators, would they tell you that there seems to be an increasing number of children who have fear and apprehension about attending school, and they have social anxiety? Is that true for this school? They're intelligent, they're warm, they come, but they are afraid to come, to just be in groups. So if you knew that, then, and if you knew what to do, you could actually shape the personality qualities of your children. Is that not true? That is true. Would you please nod? Ready? Nod. Yes, you could, because your family is the most powerful environment they face for years and years and years, maybe forever. So you could, if you knew how to go about this, you could actually shape how they went about doing things and so on. So one of my sons had a son, and he was one of those afraid to go meet in people, and his counselor said, well, if you feel like afraid, then don't go. And my son told me that, and I said, get him away from that counselor as fast as you can. And he said, why? And I said, well, let me tell you an old joke. It's a joke, a World War II joke between the American soldiers and the Italian soldiers. And it was a joke made up in the U.S. Army. So the colonel went to the Italian soldier, the Italian colonel went to the Italian soldier and said, son, are you afraid about the battle in the morning? And he said, yeah. And the colonel said, so am I. And then during the night, they left and retreated. The joke is that the American said, the American colonel went to the American soldier and said, are you afraid? He said, yes. And the colonel said, so am I. And in the morning, they attacked. And they're explaining the difference between U.S. Marines and, say, other cultural people. And the reason that was a joke was, in those days, there was a lot of truth to that. And in fact, you could read one of the most famous statements of World War I was that when the Americans got there, they were facing the largest German offensive in World War I because Russia had made their own peace, and the German soldiers on the Eastern Front were now being brought, and they were now facing the U.S. soldiers. And when they got there, the French soldiers said to them, the U.S. Marines were moving up, and the French said, you need to retreat, you should retreat. And so the Americans said, why? For hell's sakes, we just got here. And they're telling this story about the beginning of the U.S. Marines and how it started. And it's in our culture that when you're anxious, you typically do not withdraw, you face it. Isn't that true? But let's suppose more and more of us, in order to be sensitive and kind, which we should be, you wouldn't make kids face it, but we'd have to deal with the emotions differently to help them turn their shyness and their anxiety into something else. So it's like, come on, we'll do it together. Or let's work this out. Sometimes I'm afraid too. And you have to learn to go about dealing with emotions in an interesting way. So here's some things that you could teach. Loving and being loved. Any of you taught about loving and being loved in your family last week? Did you? A little? Well, which was more important to you, getting the chores done or loving people? Oh, very good. Thank you. Okay. Are you sure? Okay, how about confidence, happiness, hope, optimism, loneliness, safety, peace, compassion, gratitude, tolerance, and acceptance? Any of those? See, I don't know. Somebody says, well, what do you teach your kids? Make that your list. And make sure they know what it feels like and how they display it and how they can talk about it. My wife and I had so many children for our family home evening. We had a family home evening program that had 10 parts to it because we wanted everybody to do something every family home evening, and we rotated them. And so one of the things we did was to teach a manners skit on how to have good manners. So you'd go out and display your emotional behavior in good manners. And then somebody was created or looked up a saying, a little parable saying, and we had to learn to memorize that, like a smile is a curved line that sets things straight. Now, why would you teach little teeny sayings like that? Because people, when they're in difficult circumstances, tend to repeat to themselves some little motto. See, and you just drill that in so they can use it. And they say, well, I can do that. And so you can teach a positive attitude that way. When it was my turn one year, about this time of year, I had a chance to make my family memorize what I learned, so I taught them this. It is well to resolve well, but it is not well to rashly resolve, then rashly retreat from resolve. And my children said, well, Dad, I said, my turn, let's memorize it. And then they said, well, what does it mean? I said, don't make New Year's resolutions without thinking them through. See, and you have all these opportunities to teach, and if you just taught these little one-liners over and over again, see, that had to do with confidence and you can manage and so on, it's amazing how often people refer to those and when they face, a crisis or something really difficult. Well, growth of emotional self-reliance is individualized and influenced to exposure to social contagion. Here are 5 possible options for your children. They could be in a set of optimal conditions where the parents and they're growing up, they're healthy and so on. Another is that some children inherit brain reactivity. Some kids inherit highly reactive brains. Now what that means is that our brains have sort of screens of what they admit and what they allow. Some children's brains, often very creative kids, and often children who have an attentional disorder, have big holes in their screens. So stuff gets through to them. And when it gets through to them, they're responding to all of this stuff. Well, other kids have screens around them that have very small holes, and so they can shut some stuff out. And so what happens is that the highly reactive kids often have more mental and emotional problems because their brains are attempting to deal with too much stuff. And like I say, very often, very creative kids are like that. They have a hard time being touched. We have a daughter who's like that, in my opinion. One day, she came into the house, ran to the piano. She's about 5 years old and put both hands on the keyboard and started to play. And I said, honey, what is that song? What's the name of that song? And she said, it's what the birds were singing. Now, it's also true that she couldn't stand to have anybody comb her hair. And she has a hard time dealing with groups of people. She'll start to sweat and start to breathe hard when she's in a group of people. And so it's difficult for her. But she's wonderfully creative verbally and written language and a lot of the arts. And she sends homemade Christmas cards to over, makes them for over 100 people, and they're made by her and by hand. Is it 100? 100 people. So getting a Christmas card from her is like getting a present. And then she'll send little, these Advent, she has an Advent chain, and there are things that she has written in each one. It's made up of an 8 by 11 page, folded up, and wrapped in a circle, and one for every day of December. So on those days you open them up, and she has just written in there some of the most delightful, interesting things. But boy, she has a hard time being in groups of people or facing some kind of situations. And the point of that discussion is that we need to take a look at these 5 reasons. The effects of trauma. Emotional trauma for some children could be parental conflict of a certain sort, It could be witness any kind of violence. It could be assault and abuse, of course, those types of things. Now let me tell you the most common, you'd have to see this to believe it. But when there's enough of the right kind of trauma, what you see in children is called arrested development. Their emotional development stops at about that age. So they could be 19 and they'd have the emotions of a 13-year-old. And if you knew what to look for, you could tell that that's true. So sometimes the things that are traumatic for us, we say, I will tell you, one of the things that's traumatic for most children is parental anger. Because parents, when they're angry, typically are aggressive. See, they think they're angry because they're frustrated. Why? Why do you do that? But if you listen to the words accompanied with the anger, the message is, I am angry because of you. Now, if we could learn, for example, to just express our anger as frustration. I'm so frustrated. I'm having a real hard time with this, and I need to talk about it and so on, so that our children would not feel so aggressed upon by the parents. So virtually in every case, when children have difficulty with uncontrolled anger, there are other people in the family who also have trouble with uncontrolled anger. And so you have modeling going on, and so we get certain kinds of trauma. Then we have something called social contagion. You want an example of social contagion? You could go, you can't do it in this school, but you could go to any high school right now, and the kids from sophomores up and earlier are very open about their newly discovered gender identities. And they'll say, well, I'm bisexual. What are you? Oh, really? You're, okay. And my daughter sent me a list of over 33 different titles. Is that true or not true? And they talk about it openly, and they identify, and what we've got is something called social contagion. And now, according to kids, we have to be able to identify our own gender identity and be prepared to understand people of several different categories. I thought there are two things I'm really glad about my own high school years. They were just boys and girls. I got those two. And then none of us smoked marijuana, first of all, because it wasn't available and no one of us could spell it. And so we couldn't order it. And now it's available in any school hall in the state of Utah. You don't believe that, do you? You should. It's true. Excepting this school. But it might even be here as well. But probably not. I hope not. But boy, it's the parents tell us in virtually every other school you can get it any day when you go to school. And then the absence of a nurturing environment. Some parents just do not know how to nurture their children. They don't know how to care for them, to have empathy for them, and talk with them and so on. And so all of those are possible ways you could prevent the growth of self-reliance. Okay, well, what does it really look like now? We'll quickly go through this. Knowing how to live successfully, they have a path of success. Think about that. Well, don't eat that. You know, you might gain weight. That is not teaching a path to success. What is it? It's teaching a path to, or something else, but it's not saying, I know, let's work out this plan and we'll develop a really good diet and then we'll eat that and everybody will turn out to be really happy and we'll all go to heaven, at the end of life. That is a path to success. What's the ratio between parental criticism and parental encouragement, would you say? Even? 50-50? 10-1. More criticism because the parents are saying, stop that, get off that, quit that. One of my favorite research studies, I'll remember the rest of my life because of the name of the author. His name was Bothell Bernstein. Do you remember Bothell? Probably not. I just like to say Bothell Bernstein, wouldn't you? Just try it, Bothell Bernstein. And here's what he did. He was British, and he was an anthropologist, a cultural anthropologist. He went to the school system in his area and asked the principals to identify the top 25%, the highest achieving, and the bottom 25%. Then he went to all the children's homes and asked them all the same question. How do you explain what goes on at school to your children? And do you know what it's called a dependent variable. Do you know what his result was? He counted the number of words. So which group of parents use the most words? The children of the parents of the children who are the high performers, or the parents who are the low performers? Which? What would you say? The parents of high achieving children tend to use many more words to explain and talk about things. Now, to somebody quiet and deliberate like you, you'd probably think, no, they just talk less. But now let me tell you why that's relevant. You're training into your children an attention span by how you talk with them, right? What if you say, shut up, get off, stop that, I'll break your arm. How many words are in your sentences? 2. Now let's suppose your 5-year-old goes to kindergarten, right? What is the average talking time of a kindergarten teacher? Do you happen to know? I have studied 2 teachers just for the heck of it with a stopwatch and went in. And do you know what the average talking time for a kindergarten teacher is for those 2? 1 minute and 40 seconds, which would be 1 minute and 37 seconds longer than the children's attention span would be who are talked at by that. So you can see why some of the kids, after the teacher's going on saying, today we're going to talk about green, and you love green, and it's so beautiful, you've lost those 3 kids over there because they've been told, shut up and get to school. See, and so we're training our children by the language you use to develop a attention span. Now, it is true, though, it is true that there can be too much. See, too much language. Then we can bury each other in that, and that's so. We experience more positive than negative emotions. Which should you pay most attention to? I can see you're sad today, Billy. My gosh, you're happy. You know, it's so good. You know, at breakfast, we only have happy people here, so I'm going to meet you before you start breakfast, and I'm going to hug and kiss you so we get rid of any crankiness before you get there. And then, if you don't handle it, I'm going to say, call me, would you please go back to your room and start over because we want just happy people here. And then they come again, then you hug them again, and you get them so they're really happy so we can have happy people at breakfast. Or do you say, well, you are what? Don't come to breakfast like that. You know, it's upsetting to everybody. Isn't this terrible? You can tell where this is going, can't you? It will confront all of us. Don't you hate it? I hate it. I hate being the one. Okay, what about developing a sense of self-control over emotions and thoughts? Do you want anybody to do that? Now, this should be something that we'd bring right out. Are you ready for it? How much time do you spend in self-criticism per day, would you guess? A lot. Now, what if I told her that eventually her thoughts will emerge first in her language and in her emotions and then in her actions, which is true? And I would say to you, you're probably going to have to give up self-criticism. And you're probably also going to have to develop a whole lot more positive notions about yourself. So would you consider working with me just a little and do that? Ready? Just repeat after me. I am amazingly bright. I'm hugely wise. I have enormous capacity for compassion. All right, now take a few of those home, and when you're do you have breakfast with your kids? In the middle of the conversation, just say, I would like you to know that I am amazingly bright. Now, why would we laugh? Because, see, it seems so, right? But see, we ought to, and we ought to try that out and see if we can improve our abilities. Then here's another one. People who have self-reliance could generate their own positive feelings and regulate negative times during stress. And they have social confidence and adaptability. Have you got those 5 things down? They're on your document. Okay, but you want to pay attention to them. They know how to live successfully. They understand what success is more than they understand what failure is. I'll bet you if you ran down there and ran up there, and here's what might happen to you if you do that. Well, that's going to be a positive map. What's the best way to go on a date? To really be successful on a date. Your son is 16. What are the good things to do on a date? Ready?
Go get a good dinner.
Go get... Come here. No, come on. Now, he's got a son, and he's going on his first date. And he said, what do you do on a, to be really successful? You'd say...
Make sure you pick up the girl first.
Do you want to talk with me after? Because we're... So too far. Have a good meal. They're actually basically good. But there's a whole lot more you could say, aren't there? Get her home on time. What they're doing is talking about the events of the evening and not the behavior of the evening. So if he did the events, it would be okay? Now, who's answering this question? The mother or the father? Okay, so you'd get him ready, right? Would you have him hold out his hand to help the girl out of the car? Would you have him open the door for her? Some girls don't like that nowadays, but would you teach your son that? Would you try? So you would give him, for the situation he's in, a path toward success. I once wrote that out for a group of priests in my ward. They said, would you please give us what people used to do years ago to be successful? And I wrote all the stuff that I learned, and I gave it to them. Do you know what their response was? It just made me laugh. They said, where did you come up with these revolutionary ideas? And I said, they had so many cool secrets. See, back then, because they would teach you things like, when you open the door and help a girl out, and you hold out your hand, and she hands it to you, just before you drop her hand, squeeze it just a little. Just squeeze it just a little. Well, why do that? Because you will be saying, what will he be saying? I like you. They are clueless. See, to all that stuff. So you have this problem, see. So I know, but what's your path to success? If you're going to be diligent in school, would you say, do your homework on the day it's assigned? Yes or no? Would that be a good thing to do? Would you learn to write your papers and have them ready 3 days before they're due so you could review them at least once before you turn them in? Yes? Okay, and would you set a time to say, sit in that chair and try it out? At 3 o'clock, be right there and do your homework. Would you like to do your homework before you play at night? Do you want that? Okay, and would you like to think instead of grades, to view tests as a measurement of your study habits and not a measure of how smart you are? Because if you got a B on a test, it would mean that you probably need to punch up your... But your children think that the grade is a measure of their intellect, when in fact it's not. So then you could have them experience more positive and negative emotions, self-control, and so on. We've gone over that. So here's what it looks like again: being resilient, hopeful, courageous, starting, persisting, displaying forgiveness, successful, intimate friendships, and so on, and you have all those. Okay, then why doesn't it develop? What is going on in families? So here it is. High anxiety will cause problems in the development of, and most parents who have at least 4 children will have one child who's very anxious, at least. Sometimes you'll have more than one. And if you have more than one, it's, and we should give you rewards, just for being parents at the end of every week. See, because it's a bit of challenging. We got this, we got their feelings are caused by others. The sicker any person is, the more they believe their emotions are caused by someone else. You make me feel so loved. See, that ordinarily would be a compliment, wouldn't it? It's a little frightening, because on the day I'm sad, who does my brain think has caused that? You. So who would you want your children to believe caused their emotions, at least half the time? Themselves. So you need to work on that. And then sometimes we lack positive individuality caused by prolonged illness. If you have a child who has been ill for a long period of time, they have trouble with that. Okay? Insufficient comfort from others, compassion or empathy. Researchers tell us that when children are not comforted in their families, they believe that negative emotions have no end. And so they measure comforting behavior on the part of parents, because when parents comfort and empathize, the children's feelings change and their brain believes there's an end to it. And when they're not able to comfort the children, they think it just goes on and on. We've got abuse and episodes of mistreatment, disruptive parenting. Parents have a lot of conflict over how to deal with the kids, and so on. Neglect, abandonment, rejection, excessive electronics and technology use. We hear that over and over again, but boy, we're not doing as much as we should about that. When we went around, I went with Dr. Brent Pugh, who gave an hour's presentation on the effect of electronics on brain development, and it's a little frightening, really. And if you wanted somebody to come and people would be interested in, his name's Brent Pugh. He would come, and all your teachers would love it, because he will tell them what's going on. And what are the signs? Anxiety, depressed moods, dependencies, and entanglements that prevent the growth of autonomy. I can't do this without you. I've got my best friend here, and I'm going to do what she does. I dress just like her, and everything's going to be fine. And I won't spend much time on this. False belief system. They believe things that are untrue about the world and about themselves. Self-criticism. Rabid self-criticism. You're not the only one in this room, by the way, who would answer. Thanks for an honest answer. But I'll bet you if we got everybody individually and say, how much time do you spend in self-criticism every day? I'll bet a lot of us do. It's one of the things we pass on to our children if we're not careful. And the inability to establish and maintain emotionally intimate relationships. There are over 200,000 single unmarried adults on the Wasatch Front. Nearly 60% of the membership of our church are single. Were you aware of that? Because there are people, men and women, who do not know how to succeed and maintain in emotionally intimate relationships. And the women have a hard time finding normal men. They will say, would you nod? Let everybody, she's saying, you must have some experience with that. I know, not him, of course. But friends, you're friends, you knew, right? Right, okay. All right. And then think about they go out and they'll date a time or two and then that's off. And then they'll date a time or two and that's off, and they do not know how to stay in it, men and women. I don't know if you happen to be Latter-day Saints. There are a lot of you Latter-day Saints. Well, somebody has a plan to frustrate marriage relationships. Isn't that true? Wouldn't that be the very best thing that you could do to prevent something else from happening? And it's happening to us. And they're coming out of families and they do not know how to meet somebody or somebody who will participate in that and know how to do it well. It's ugly if you get right into the middle of it. I have seen my own children weep. I have seen the children of other people weep because they cannot. A man, I'll tell you, I have a patient who's 27, about as nice a human being, and he cannot find a girl. Smart, graduated from college, makes good money, and he is dating to find somebody and he cannot find one. Handsome, really, really a fine person. And boy, they don't stay. They'll be with him and they off somewhere else doing something. And it may be his problem as well as hers. But it's a real challenge. What did I say? How many thousands of single people are here on the Wasatch Front? 200,000. And what percent of the LDS Church are single? Approximately. That includes widows, that's right. But they're saying divorced. Well, they're divorced people and people who have never married. Pardon? Yeah, all no children. No, these are adults. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. Thank you for pointing that out. You could come to my presentations anytime you want. Low energy and devitalized relationships, social anxiety, addictions, eating disorders, self-harm. Intense feelings of being controlled or excessively trying to control each other. These are the signs that emotional reliance is not happening. Have you got those down? Low energy and devitalized relationships. I just had a dad tell me today, he's the laziest kid I have ever seen in my life. What's that? Low energy and, all right, social anxiety, dishonesty, and deception. A lot of adolescents lie anyway, but now we're having a pandemic of dishonesty and creative forms of it. See, and it just goes on. They make promises that they don't keep. They'll say things for effect, like, yes, I'll be there. You can count on me. Now, can I apply another LDS truism? What event in our religion requires somebody to make a promise and keep it? Covenants. The whole nature of our religious practice is based on being able to make a promise and honor it. And we're watching people, adults and kids, have a hard time with that. Addictions. We have new addictions every so often. We've got pornography that's coming along. And I'm not happy to say, that women are becoming equal with men faster in that area than they used to. And now we're having more and more females addicted to pornography as well than we used to. It just blows my mind. And then intense feelings of being controlled or excessively trying to control others. All right, what can you do? Are you ready? Would you read the first one on that list? I'm tired of talking. Would you? What is it?
Learn more about emotional intelligence.
2.
Be a healthy emotion.
3. Louder, please. Would you go next, sir?
Examples of about part
Express anger sparingly and mildly. 7. Mentor. And 8. Okay, how many of you have at least 3 family meals together every week, where all your children are gathered around your table and we're laughing and talking? Would you raise your hands, please? That is so great. So great. Thank you for doing all of that. There are a lot of families that buy fast food and come home and then they all, go to the rooms and don't even have a meal time together. All right, what about 9? Would you read 9?
Express healthy love.
Okay, now what can we do with specific action plans? This is, I think, what you came for, so here we go. You ready? Now, if you have questions, ask them, because I'll talk about each one, and I'll say, here's what you can do in your family. You can know how emotional self-reliance develops. It's in your handout. And you can say, here's what goes on. And there's a lot of information about it, and so on. Here's the next one. Organize a family plan and promote emotional self-reliance rather than wait until problems appear. Why is the headlines in the Deseret News saying a lack of therapy for our children? Why? Because we're all reacting to it and we're not getting in front of it. It's the old fence, on the hill instead of the ambulance at the blow. See, we just have got to say, we've got to invest in our families in a little bit different way because it's coming at us faster. If you have a computer in your home, do you have pornography in your home? Yes or no? And most kids who have a sense of wisdom and understanding about computers can bypass parental controls. Is that also true? Okay, now what's the average age that boys and girls feel a genuine sexual attraction to the other sex? Guess. It's a genuine, I'm looking at her neck and her body and her face. Oh my gosh, she is so cute. What's the average age for boys? 10. So the parents are thinking their children are just growing up and he's 10 and everything's fine, right? It's not. They're having genuine sexual attraction and around. So would you talk to them about that? What percent of you as a family learned about sex from your parents? At least 60% of what you know about sex from your parents. Did you? No. So what the three of you did was get together with your friends and pulled your ignorance then, right? Is there anybody who had parents who said, come and sit down and talk to us and we're going to explain to you exactly about you? We have one. And here we have two. Did your father come and talk to you as well, or just your mother? They were both in the car, so it took place in the car.
But they were both there. They were my brother.
And you're okay, and your brother. Okay, so it's kind of a family thing, right? It's okay. I won't ask the other set of questions, or like how to work out, but because it's private. But I'll see. Okay, but now think about that. Now, come on, just with me just for a minute. Among all the things that are important for your children to know, where would you put that knowledge? Top one or two? All right, now listen. If you can't say the words out loud without blushing, go to the shower, turn it on, and repeat all the sexual words in the vocabulary until you can say it without blushing. Then get the child together and say, I am going to talk to you about sex, and here's what it means. And just talk to them and build a conversation relationship with them, right? And do this before what age?
It's an 8, right?
Well, 8 would be fine, but some kids will want to know before that. So if they want to know, would you tell them? Well, they say age appropriate, but I'm explaining to you the appropriate age has changed because it's all around us. Do you think 7-year-olds do not know about sex? I think you'd be surprised.
I think it's super important to also know that this is a constant dialogue. This isn't just a one down, sit, have the talk. It's a constant dialogue. So you're going to talk to your 7-year-old about sex or about anatomy, but then you're not. But then maybe as they get older, then you start talking about other factors with it too. And you just keep that open dialogue and continue building on it, so that it's not a frightening conversation for them to have with you.
It's probably the most important outcome. Thank you. You want to start the conversation relationship so they can come to you and talk about it and you can talk to them and so on. Now what that means is that we're bringing them close to us and mentoring them about really important things. Now don't answer this question, but do you ever deal with sexual matters in your elementary school. If you talk to the vice principals of most elementary schools, they will say an increasing amount of their time is devoted to sexual acting out behaviors of the elementary school kids. We don't think you do here, but that's why I don't answer it, but I'll bet you do. And at least some part, I hope it's never. All right, differentiate your children as unique individuals, understand family and child development, create a climate of safety. You can read about all these. Adapt your discipline approach as children develop. I'd like to talk about that just for a minute. Hard for parents to get their old plan in place and get it going, and then change it as children grow older. One time in my class at BYU, and he was right, they put a lot of classes together, and so it was my wonderful privilege to teach maybe between 250 to 300 kids in a class. So we were talking about that one day, and after a while they learned to talk with each other and they've gotten over some of their inhibitions. And so I was explaining to them how important it is that parents make proactive adjustments in how they deal with kids as kids mature. And this guy raised his hand and he said, I've got an example of what not to do. He said, the other day, I did something my dad didn't like and he grounded me for my car. Now he's a college student. And so they all tittered a little bit, and he said, that's not the worst part. He said, I'm 24 years old. And then we're all sitting there quiet, and he said, and I'm married. So his father did not adjust his disciplinary plan according to, that's very rare, but you get the idea. Gradually create independent decision making. We want to say to our kids, look, let's get together and make decisions together. And I'll help you. We talk them over. Understand, oh, here's 9. Do you want to know what a personal fable is? You ever heard the words? Adolescent kids create personal fables, and they have imaginary audiences. The imaginary audience is the group of people they perform for when they go to school. And they might be intense. It might be a basketball coach. It might be the girls that they want to impress. It might be so on. And then they develop also a personal fable, which is a story about themselves. And the personal fables can be either realistic, they can be accentuated in the positive too much, but they also can be so accentuated in the negative that they don't find it worth living. That's a personal fable. So you learn to ask your kids about personal fables and imaginary audiences. All adolescents have them, and they're some of the funnest things to get them talking about. Well, when you go to school, who are you trying to impress? Well, who are the girls? Who are the boys? How do you see yourself, functioning, and so on? And a lot of kids have very unrealistic personal fables. That they're doing okay when they're not. Or they are not doing okay when they're capable of it. Or they'll say, I'm worthless. I'm not worth it. I've served as a stake president in Highland. And I served, and we had 12 suicides in North Utah County towns 1 year. And when we were delivering this series, we got to Westlake High School when they just had their 3rd in the high school that year. Those kids have personal fables that make themselves to be not worth living, wholly inadequate. And you look at them and say, but you're wonderful. Point is, they don't think that. They have a personal fable. And then teach moral behavior and moral leadership by using inductive communication quickly. Inductive communication means you refer to the emotions inside.
What were the questions you're saying that the dialogue you have with your child to understand their personal fable?
When you go out and you're going shopping, who do you dress up for? Do you dress up?
Are you asking me?
Yes, I'm just doing it to you right now.
I don't know if I always dress that now. I have clothes on and I go shopping.
So now, okay, but you're older and you might not have a personal fable, But your personal fable is probably being one of those people who don't give a fig about what other people think about what you're dressed like. All right?
Most of the time, hopefully.
Okay, so that's now your group. But back when you're 16 or 17, you'd be, you're in front of a mirror, you know, and and you'd say, well, who are you looking forward? Who do you want to impress? And what you're thinking about what other people think.
So that's the way I want to dress it to my youth.
Yes, yeah. And then that's the imaginary audience, and then you say, well, what do you have to do in order to be successful with that group? Because they dream at night their personal fables. They'll imagine themselves, you know, hitting the last shot, you know, doing all the stuff that goes on. All right. Teach healthy belonging, inclusion, and other social skills, and create a tradition of doing very hard things, and combine that with emotional support. Now, would you like to stop here because I have more? Would you like me to stop and go on, or do you want more? You want more? You up for more? You up for more? Okay. Now, all of these are listed. Do you want me to go back to those? I'll show you those. Have any questions about those?
Do I have any influence on, like, how might I have that conversation with, like, if it's something that I don't know if I would.
He would tell you to go right to the teacher, wouldn't you?
But do you know what I mean? Like, I'm just because they're noticing
No.
the negative self-talk, and it's something we very intentionally do not do. And so they're like, and so I just told them, well, tell them, you're really good at drawing. Don't say you're not. You're good.
That's right. All that would help, but somebody needs to go to them and say to them, are you aware that you? So for some people, I have a twisted, perverse notion of humility. And the idea is that it's sort of, I've got to voice my inadequacies. Well, you might feel them, but you don't have to voice them. Especially in front of the kids. That's right. Now you're raising a wonderful question because, see, we have a lot of cooperation between the school teachers and the parents, and some of it is not that great. Because all the teachers are doing is just regular people working hard, devoting themselves to teaching, but they present themselves as a person, right?
Right, and so that's the thing is I don't know if it's necessarily my place to go correct them, you know, but, because I do my best, but maybe it's something that we could, like, I don't know.
All right, after this meeting, line up and tell him.
Like he's junior high.
It is your place. You go right to him and say, I'm here because I'm grateful for what you're doing, you know.
Well, and I have noticed at this school there is a lot more positive. Like, they're doing much better than the world, but it's just still really hard.
No, I would address that whenever I saw that, and I'd do it nice, but I wouldn't stand by and let it happen. Because the language that adults use often are the language the kids. See, there it is. Wonderful question. Anyone else?
Like a gift. So no, but if we have a child that's doing something that we see, one of these things, and we're like, oh my gosh, they're doing number 5. Like, how do you redirect that? Like, do we point out to them? Do we show this and say, look, this sounds exactly like you? Like, how do we redirect our children to help them?
Actually, in your handout, I think, unless it's different than the one I wrote. It says in here things that you can, in fact, do about each one.
Okay.
See, and so it's like, well, I'm seeing that, and I want to adapt as quickly as I can, right? Do not sit around to wait for stuff to happen. I'm going to repeat this. It's moving faster outside than we think it is. 10 years ago, it was slower out there. Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, and with the advent of technology, The whole thing was, you spend money now for what word? Fast, yes? We buy fast, and so the faster it is, and so we're going through life doing fast, okay, and so it gets away from us. So if you saw something like that, and if you did, listen, I don't know, maybe that teacher would take offense, but I'll bet not. I'll bet if he's here, he would welcome, or she would welcome, that feedback. My experience with the faculty here, and I've had just limited contact, but they all seemed like that way to me. And I don't think they'd be working here or applying for positions here unless they wanted to do everything as well as they could. Any other questions? You ready to go home? It's okay if you are. Yes, sir. Inductive communication refers, it's actually a wonderful, thank you for asking, because I was trying to be worried about your time and I should have spent a little more time on it. So when children are growing up, we can use words that have to do with them and what's inside them, like what you're thinking, are you happy, tell me what you were going through when you had that experience. Or we could use words that have to do with objects like ball and so on, both of which are important. But research in language development is really clear that if you use more words that refer to the external stuff, your children will have more difficulty acquiring moral behavior, which refers to what's inside them. So in a gospel sense, see, it's really important to us, because if you read Jeremiah 31 and 31 to 33, which is where it said the very best, God said to Jeremiah, there was a time when I brought you out of Egypt and I gave you one law. Okay, and you didn't follow it, but I will give you a new law, and I will place it where? In your inward parts, and write it in your heart. And then if you went back and read the New Testament, he's saying we want things to refer to what's inside you. In Luke 21:17, I think, he tells a story about how somebody said, where's the kingdom of God? And Jesus says you cannot find the kingdom of God by saying it is low here, it is low there, for the kingdom of God is where? Where is it? Within you. And it says that. And so what we're doing is asking them to refer to themselves and to think about what they think about, identify some of what they're feeling. A lot of people, a lot of men in particular, think, oh, this is sort of a touchy feeling. And we can do it too much. You can say, oh, tell me exactly how you're feeling about that now. And you did too much. But we want them to be able to say, I'm happy, I'm sad, I have difficulty.
But the reason you're asking is to get them to develop that capability of checking.
That's right. Because moral behavior rests on the ability of us comprehending the consequences of our behavior for someone else and ourselves. And so it's all tied to that. It's based on what helps and harms people. And so you'd want to be able to teach them to understand themselves very well and be able to identify that, because that's the basis for them understanding. Yeah. Well, a lot of stories. It's like one of my favorites is some high school kid in a nearby high school came out. They all had the same disliked math teacher, and two of his friends were out waiting by this math teacher's van. And they said, look, let's let the air out of all of his tires before we go home. And this kid said, I don't think so. And they said, come on, we don't like him. He said, whatever. And he said, would you imagine what that would be like for him to come at the end of the workday, find all of his tires flat? See, do you hear it? See, and what we're losing is a lot of these emotional connections, see, between ourselves and other people, and it has to do because we're busy. I promise you, if you wrote, go home and just do this, make a big circle, and up here put stick figures for your kids and put stick figures for you, and then write 3 words across the middle. The work we want our kids to do, the relationship behavior we want them to know, and the rules we want them to follow, and then ask yourselves, where do you spend your most time? And I promise you that in most families in this area, We spend more time with rules and with getting the work done. And less time on the relational qualities, all of which that have to do with the E word, all of which have to do with emotions. And understanding what they are. And if a dad is out with the son and the son's talking about this, and he said, well, what was that like for you, son? If you got cut from the basketball team, would you tell me, please, about that? Well, I don't want to. Okay, well, I'll wait a while, but I'll wait a while and then I'll ask. And I'll say, well, were you upset? Did you feel unhappy? Did you believe you should? Yes, I did. Are you angry at him? See, we talk about that until he can put into words a lot of what he's thinking about himself. Now, we wouldn't do this in a public group, but we could ask the women in this room how many of them live emotionally barren lives because their husbands do not know how to do this. And they would tell you that a fairly high percent of women are married to men who do not know how to address themselves emotionally. True or not true? Is that true, do you think? Is your husband capable of doing this? After, did you say after? After. How long have you been married? Okay. You would not have been if he was bad. Because you would think he doesn't understand me, he doesn't know me, see, and so on. Any other questions?
I'm kind of stressed out a little bit as my daughter gets into junior high about like the whole imaginary audience. Like, how do you navigate that and help them feel like it's not important what everyone thinks?
What they're thinking is not important?
No, not necessarily, but just she cares so much about
What other people?
what. Yeah, like for example, today she had a ski race, and
Now remember me saying that the people who are the least successful are the people who worry the most about what's external to them, and they believe their feelings are caused by
other people.
Other people. Spouses are like that, and children's friends are like that. And children's friends are like that. She is what? 12, 13?
She's 13.
Yeah. Well, it's something that gives you an opportunity to work through. So here's how you deal. So you start teaching her, take a list of all the events that she's going to participate in. A church group, a classroom in school. Sometimes, when a teacher says that's not correct. And give her a success map for how she can behave in each one of those situations and start her practicing. So then she goes to mutual, and she's with a group of girls, and you've worked out that she's going to say hello to people before they say hello to you, and she's going to give 2 or 3 compliments, and she's going to ask questions and listen, and so on. And then let's suppose she does, and she comes home, and you say, wow, how did you do? And she'll say, I did this, I did that. Now why? What's the principle behind that? It's training her brain to be more concerned about than other people. And what we want is both. See, we want to be concerned about other people, but we want our kids to have an option of being able to pay attention to and base their decisions on what they know to be true about themselves and their life. And that's what a lot of kids who are not emotionally self-reliant do not have. They don't have a plan inside their own mind for themselves. I asked my son one time, I said, how'd you go through high school without being pressured into drinking with your friends? And he said, well, I didn't, but one night, they said, we're going to make you. So they went to a 7-Eleven store and they're going to get some beer. And I started to laugh right at that point because it's so dumb. When I was his age, my friends and I decided we'd try smoking, which is even dumber than getting a can of beer. And I learned right off that I was deathly allergic to red dot cigars, and so my smoking history was very brief. And so I asked him what happened, and he said, they said we're going to. He said, I didn't know what to say, and so Dad, I told them, look, you guys, I've made a deal with my dad. And I promised him I wouldn't do it. We had no deal. But he used me, and that was just fine, right? So he said they backed off after I told them that. Now, see, I think a lot of it has to do, if you read this, and go through it. It'll give you some very specific things you can do. I liked your question, when you see things happening with children, what do you do? And I'm saying, do not wait. For sure, don't do that. Just get right involved and say, I'm here and I've got a plan, we'll help you out. Yes, sir.
So children that have at different ages when it's discovered, and the older that a child gets, obviously, the harder it is to try to repair and those types of things. So what is your experience in dealing with kids who are challenged and recovering? So like a 15-year-old, a 13-year-old, a 17-year-old, and if they have some of these issues, how fast can they repair, or can their situation be repaired?
It's a great question. It depends on them a lot, and it depends on the quality of relationship that you have. As a child psychologist, for example, and some daughter or some son was brought to me and said, would you please help this person? We'd start talking, and then I'd start asking questions about how he views himself or herself. And I'd ask questions like this. Tell me which kind of person you are. Are you the kind of person who's really talented and is failing to perform according to the level of your talents? Is it that? Or are you a person who is actually not very talented and you're doing pretty well? And he'll say, well, I'm the first. And then I'll say, all right, now tell me about people. Are you the kind of person who really enjoys and feels comfortable around people? See, I'll go down a list of situations until I know how they see themselves, and then I'll say to them, is there any way you would like me to help you? Because I have some ideas about all of that. And then I'll say, how hard do you want to work at this? And so we'll talk and visit, and then I have very specific things that I'll have them do, see, based on what their situation is. And it's almost always the same. I don't know how to control myself emotionally. I'm either down or whatever. I don't do well with people as well as I'd like to. I'm not achieving as well as I'd like to. And I'm pessimistic and self-critical quite often. And I believe that there's not much hope for next week. It'll be a cluster of what's on this screen. And then you just go right to work on that. And you just take one at a time and get after it until you teach them to be optimistic, until you teach them to stay away from toxic people, and teach them how to generate their own positive feelings, because they don't believe they can. They think their life is controlled by stuff. And so you work and work and work, and sometimes it takes a long time. But for most kids who are 17 and 18, you can do it in 3 to 5 months. And at least they can begin to see the other side, where they can see how much better it is to function. The toughest ones are the ones who make really serious mistakes when they're in the middle of this, like a lot of sexual acting out or the chemical abuse and stuff, because it is often connected to it. And then you're busy, if you're a psychologist, you're busy getting your arm around this part, and then you've got that part, and so on. And then you also interview the parents, and you say, we need your help. So would you be willing to? And you get everybody to work on it, because it's that important. Anybody who's dealt with parents who's had a suicidal child and succeeded, their leg muscles will jump whenever somebody says, I just don't feel like living. We no longer mess around with that. And so on. I've seen a 9-year-old boy kill himself before I could get my hands on it. His dad beat him. And the dad came in and I said, is that true? And he said, yes, listen to him. I'll always remember. He said, my dad used to beat me when I was his age, and I turned out okay. And then he said, but I take my rings off so I don't mark him. His boy's 9. He found his dad's pistol and he was gone the next week before I could get my hands on it. I've walked down too many hospital halls where that's gone on. A talk with parents, oh my gosh, it's just heartbreaking. But it isn't just that. It's the other stuff that is going on. And it's happening there are huge numbers. I need to make it clear that we have wonderful parents in our communities, in our society, people who invest and commit and doing a great job. It's just that these individuals, there seems to be more of them, and they seem to be more difficult than they used to be. And so, and it's like this. Do you have a stake in whether or not the kids in your students' classroom bring their homework in on time? Do you have any homework with the teachers in this school? Do you have a stake in whether or not all of the children in the classroom turn their assignments in on time? Yes or no? Well, let me explain why you should. Because if you have a bunch of kids in a class who habitually turn them in late, what is the teacher doing on the day when she or he should be teaching? She is correcting the late homework. And that's going on in our classrooms like crazy. And so it's like when I said there are many reasons for all this stuff that's happening, you find them here. You find some of them in a social group. You find some of them at church. You find some inside the school. The solution is to get us all together. I once with a family in Springville, the daughter was saying, well, the other kids' parents do. And they said, we don't. And I said, easy. Call all the families in this cul-de-sac and work out an agreed time for your kids to be home. And they did. And the next time the daughter said, well, nobody else has to be. He said, yes, I know they're. Call them. She called him and said, no, that's what time we want all our kids to be home. Ended the problem. Any other questions? Probably want to go. All right. Do you have a question? Nope. Now hold it. Would you let her get away with that? What she was about to say? But it probably would. Would you just say, I'm amazingly wise, and I would like to ask a question.
I'm amazingly wise, and I would like to ask you a question.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. My question was, when you were talking about fear equaling retreat in that example you gave, I was just wondering if you had, because I talked to multiple friends who've had this issue where they have a child who has high anxiety, particularly related to going to school, and then with the pandemic, they noticed that their children's anxiety, subsided, and they were very happy, doing homeschool. And so, but one friend particularly said, well, I feel like that's retreating. Like, I'm not teaching my child to be resilient and go to school and face that problem if I'm going to choose to homeschool. And so that was an interesting.
Well, then what you have to do is compensate, for that in some way. So you get a bunch of other people in the society and say, I'll tell you what, let's crank up some social activity once a month or twice a month, and we'll host it and we'll put it on and teach our kids, all of the kids, how to be socially successful. Now, I want to refer you to a comment that I made to this couple over here. Remember when I said about what makes a good date? Now, notice what he said. This is men. Men do this. Good food, right? Good food, and be home on time, right? And I said they are describing the events. They are not describing the behavior. And that's what we want, isn't it? We want them to have a success map so that when they're in a situation, they know how to be a successful dater, how to meet people, become acquainted, and so on. And so we need to be busy teaching these success maps to children for very specific situations. And then when they practice, say, go try it out and come back and let's talk about how you did. Were you able to? Were you able to do that? And they'll say, I did. Which worked the best? Which do you think good about? Were you happy with it or not? You can use the inductive language. Do you like feeling that way? Were you more confident? See? So great. Now the next time, let's keep going, and we will use the groups for mutual to teach what? Self-reliance and social success skills, yes? Which is what we should be doing. It is the laboratory for us to use to rear our children, not a big monolithic organization that controls us. Do you believe that? Well, that's what the general authorities are trying to get us to understand. That the center is our family, the church is to be used by us, and so on, but we're not using it as well as we could. So we could all be doing this with our kids. You could ask the bishop in your ward, get the group and say, we'd like to use the activities in the young men's differently this year. What? We'd like to use the activities to teach. My son, who's in a bishopric, just called the other night and he said, we're having a meeting with all the young men and young women's presidencies, and he said, here's what I'd like to do. And I said, sounds great. Do you have a suggestion? I would say yes. Ask all the people who work with the young men and the women what outcomes they would like in the lives of the kids by the time they're 18. And don't allow them to get away with the testimony and faith. What kinds of behavior would you like them to exhibit? Then send them home by age group and say, which ones will we produce by the time we're 14, the time when we're 16, and then organize the activities so that we are teaching. That's right. So they have maps. See how to be successful in the church. Now, one last observation. What does our church require of our children when we go to church? Name the forms of behavior that they ask our kids to participate in. I'll count. Reverent, quiet behavior. Reverent, okay, we have one. What else? Are you ever asked to give talks? What else? Do you need to be able to sing, right? Yeah. Do they occasionally ask people to lead the music? Okay, what else? Do they need to be able to ask questions? Okay. Do they need to be able to point out something positive about other people? Are they asked on one Sunday a month to tell what they believe and how they feel about him? Yes? Okay. You could produce all of those forms of behavior in your family home evenings, couldn't you? So every family home evening, you're just teaching that behavior as part of your family home evening. Okay, and they're learning how to give talks. We taught our children how to give talks without notes. It's really easy. Tell them what you're going to talk about, then tell why they should learn it, then tell them a story that illustrates it, then encourage them to try it out and close. So one day I went to church, one of my sons came and said, Dad, tell me a story. I said, what about? And he said, I've just been asked to give a talk. I need a story about this. So I told him about a faith promoting experience with his great-grandfather. You can do that. All my kids know how to lead the music because they had to at family home evening. I don't know how well they know, but they all did. But to show you how amazing they are, and then I'll be through. Teaching this big class one day, so I'd have a few minutes. And just to show these kids at BYU who are amazing to me. I would say to them, we have a few minutes, and would you please go and play the piano for us? Would you lead the music? Would you give an opening prayer? And then I'd like you to give a 2-minute talk on this subject, okay? And they would get up. And one day this girl got up and went over and sat down to the piano. But she didn't play. And I went over to her and I said, is something the matter? And she said, Brother Scoresby, I don't know how to play. Now think about that with me. This amazing girl got up and went over to play the piano. Our Latter-day Saint children are marvelous, absolutely marvelous. And I said, if it wasn't illegal, I'd hug and kiss you on both cheeks. So I got somebody who did. They're just amazing. And so on. Well, may the Lord bless you. Thank you for coming. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Thank you, Dr. Scoresby. I know, like many of you, I'm going to go home and really
stop worrying about what other people think.
There you go. I'm going to tell my family I'm amazingly wise.
Yes.
But really dive into this and study it and find some ways to implement these actionable parenting lessons. So thank you again. Can we give them one more round of applause, please?
You are welcome.
Thank you. A special thank you to our parent service organization, who so graciously supported this Heart and Mind event. They've provided some refreshments outside, so please enjoy the buntinis, not just cupcakes, they're buntinis. And as I said, this recording will be available, and so I imagine we'll be able to circulate it in some way that you can either rewatch or maybe even share with others. And so just to close, may I ask Mr. James Lawyer to give our closing prayer?
Father in heaven, we are thankful and delighted to have been here tonight and learning and pondering and thinking of our role as parents and mentors, and we express our gratitude for the truths learned tonight and pray that thou bless our efforts. Help us to be open to change and adaptation and inspiration as we strive to do our best in our homes and in our relationships with each other and others. We're thankful for those examples in our lives who model and bless us as individuals, and especially the Lord Jesus and his character and all that he's done and does for us. We pray for this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Now, what are those three statements?